In the summer of 2017, I went to Barcelona on a stag weekend. 2 solid days of debauchery, beers with the lads, getting drunk in the ocean, all the activities you of course seldom expect from responsible men in their 30s. In a hungover, severely sunburnt state, the gang decided to have a gander at the Sagrada Familia. If you're unfamiliar, this is the largest unfinished Catholic church in Europe. The brainchild of Catalan architect Antoni Gaudí, it is a grand work, a magnum opus. The Sagrada Familia is not only an artifact of artistic significance, it's one of the rare cultural statements that is still in progress. Work first began in 1882 and to this day remains unfinished. It became a project that has lived through countless historical events, survived social change, civil war, artistic strife, and the death of its creator. When Gaudí began work on the Sagrada Familia, he did so fully in the knowledge that he would not live to see it complete. He expected this from the start, being cited as saying all particularly grandiose churches have taken centuries to complete, and that another generation will collaborate, as is always the case. Obviously, one cannot know what was going through the head of a relative stranger from more than a century ago, but to me, the spirit of communal, collaborative art can be felt through this. It has been a project that has seen 7 chief architects, the most recent of whom, Jordi Forlì, has been working on the construction since 1990. Different artisans, different architectural styles. There has not been a unified voice throughout its storied history, with some more vocal critics charging the designs of certain successors as little more than heresy. Salvador Dali famously said of the building, "It would be a betrayal to even think of finishing the Sagrada Familia without genius. Let it remain there like a huge rotting tooth." It's one thing to immortalize yourself through your work, it's another to give an entire community the gift of such a potent and complicated cultural legacy. While waiting for my plane home in Reus, I spent some time in the museum there dedicated to Gaudí, and it was a fascinating story that has stuck in my mind ever since. Of course, I now know the context behind this structure, but at the time I first laid eyes on it, I did not. And the thing that stunned me about this building was not the intricacy of its design, nor the scope of this project, an artist's enduring gift to a world that would continue on long after he had returned to the Earth. No, what stunned me about this construction was simply, inelegantly, how fucking huge it was. To call the Sagrada Familia big seems a bit silly at first, but it's one of those buildings that feels very abstract until you see it up close. It's an intimidating sight, looming over you like it's judging your sins, a sprawling mass of towers upon towers upon towers, a wholly alien-feeling construct. Buildings should not be that size, should not have that sense of being added to ad infinitum. It's a feeling I've experienced before in other cities. Man-made monoliths that stand as a towering statement of dominion, a beacon of collective memory. The cathedral in Cologne, the Palazzo Biscari in Catania, and of course, Blackpool Tower. Thinking back to that weekend, the things that remain in my memory and the things that in all honesty should be left forgotten, this enduring, almost horrible image of a gargantuan mass of stone and strife has made me realise that a lot of my favourite media is very much about this sense of dread, the inalienable horror of big things. And I would like to share in this video some of my favourite examples. Created by Tsutomu Nihei in the late 90s, Blame is a science fiction manga set in the dense sprawl of a city. The city. The only space that now exists in a terrifyingly hostile future, and a place that almost immediately does not feel designed to support life. An expansive, dangerous mass of megastructures that is constantly building outward, the city is vast and enveloping. A place whose size is almost impossible to comprehend for those who exist within it, or even those outside the page looking in. The manga chronicles the journey of Kiri, a machine that thinks himself human, and Sibo, a human gradually turned machine, as they search for signs of the net terminal gene, a means of connecting with the net sphere that controls the expansion of the city in order to shut it down. This is something once carried by all humans, allowing them direct leverage over machines until a mysterious infection spread that effectively locked mankind out and doomed them to near extinction. The worst case scenario result of automated systems running wildly out of control, humanity is anathema to the city. Its safeguards, these creepy, vicious marionettes, act as an immune system for a body determined to reject all that it considers foreign, no matter the actual threats to its continued existence. And in this sense, the city should not be considered a habitat, but rather a cancer. This journey to reclaim control and halt what is essentially an annexation of the solar system takes the duo and their allies across huge stretches of urban industrial hell, journeys measured in months and years, not miles, a space whose impossible scope has even affected the evolution of those who reside within its myriad and varied spaces. People, as it stands, the survivors of the Safeguard's purges, rarely bear any familiar traits to us. Because of how the environment has been retrofitted for survival, it's difficult to gauge the size of many of the characters you meet along the way until they come face to face with one another. What seems small may in fact be big, what appears big may be small. Size, as it turns out, is always relative. An often lonely journey. It's only when you see this human presence, the communities that spring up in the cracks of this palace of eternal night, that it's clear that this is an urban sprawl that was never meant to be lived in. A catastrophic mistake. An out-of-control monster for whom even its new masters can seldom wrestle into compliance. The impact of the city is felt almost immediately thanks to Nihei's powerful, frantic art style. His environments seem to burst angrily out way beyond the confines of the page. Any appeal to a sense of surface or ground is at the mercy of authorial intent. In most cases, you cannot see where these sheer faces of steel and concrete begin and end, and in a sense, they don't. Rarely is it that the fable eggs on just how big this place is. An offhand remark about a very long elevator ride, a demarcation of the passage of time that takes a second to fully comprehend. While the actual size of the city is not known, and perhaps never will be, through contextual clues in the story, Nihei hints at it being roughly the size of Jupiter's orbit. For reference, that's 1.6 billion kilometers. I know sometimes when you put objects into perspective they lose some of their power, but even an estimate to an out-of-control gigastructure that itself eclipses whole planets, that's more than enough to strike fear into your heart, isn't it? No mere mortal, no matter the power, no matter the technology, would see even a fraction of this rampant urbanism. A space measured in lifetimes, a mass whose composite parts themselves have a completely alien historical context. 100,000 years have passed since the city's birth. While humans still exist here, it is also host to a myriad of other creatures, a realm of robots and fairies. The lines between fantasy and science warp and ripple until nothing seems to be off limits. As the manga draws to a conclusion, the sheer scale of this place never lets up. I have been quietly obsessed with this one panel near the end in which Kiri emerges into a gargantuan spherical room. A stranger observing the space through a piece of scientific equipment casually mentions the room's diameter, 143,000 kilometers. Which, is roughly the size of Jupiter, hence the speculation about the city's true size. It happens a lot here, the stranger remarks. There is something so chilling about the complacency of a statement like this. Standing solemnly in a space where the city has very clearly and literally eaten an entire planet and likely has done so to the rest of the solar system. Even more unnerving is that this is one of the very few moments where we even have some kind of voiced context to this environment, to its size and the scope of its assimilation. Much of blame is wordless, story told through action, through environment, through a rogue's gallery of pained expressions as those trying to exist are bombarded time and time again by the horrors of the city. To me, this makes sense as a diegetic consequence of this corporeal space. When time ceases to have any real meaning, when journeys like these eclipse even the dying of the light, what point is there in idle conversation? Kiri and Sibo managed to maintain something akin to camaraderie despite only very rarely talking to one another. The implication is understood, the horizon is already locked in. And you see this extending to this world that blame resides within too. From time to time, snippets of life crawl out from under the rock, but there is almost never any real sign of these communities bonding over ritual or ceremony. It's almost more chilling for this. The bleakness of a life that exists constantly under the threat of annihilation, a perpetual trauma issued across 1,000 generations for a life that seldom seems worth living. Something I've always lamented about a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction is the absence of new art, culture and tradition springing from the rubble. It makes so much sense to me, feels like a natural evolution of communities forming in the wake of such terrible eschatological consequences. It's the linchpin of Emily St. John Mandel's excellent novel Station 11, which continuously posits that old Star Trek adage, survival is insufficient. Here, however, among the grease and cogs, the pipes and wires and eternal undying cages of a beast wholly alien to us, culture's absence, to me, makes perfect sense. The Earth is gone. What replaced it is soon to engulf the heavens. Trapped in the prologue of a war to reclaim their own humanity, the residents of the city can only do the one thing they have been conditioned their entire lives to do: fight, survive. That is sufficient, and at the same time woefully inadequate. Blame stands up to me as one of the great vessels of architectural horror, because of Nihei's confidence in the ability to make mankind seem too small to be able to save itself. Here, in the bowels of a beast they once revered, they are naught but ants under the microscope. Specks of noise in an ocean of silence. Hope is but a fragment of a long-lost idea. The city is immortal, undying, omnipresent, a man-made god with a malicious eye, the bloated corpse of the sum of all of mankind's endeavours, a sublime work of fiction, unlike any other. Were I to suggest to you one piece of art that perfectly sums up my unease with the morbidity of scale, I would point you in the direction of Zdzisław Beksinski, and this painting in particular. Beksinski never titled any of his work, an act unruly and almost malicious, but at the same time wholly appropriate for what he was trying to convey, because what can you even put into words about this piece? A lone figure, torch in hand, finds themselves echoed by the giants that canvas them. It is interesting that we meet these colossal figures at eye level, that we are divorced from the smallness of the figure at the foot of the canvas, as though this altered perspective would be a salve for our own sensation of insignificance in the face of such megaliths. Framed by the spectre of death, we see no origin point nor destination for this hero's journey, just a perfect moment of dread captured in a fiery haze. This world is aflame, and you can do nothing but keep moving. Perhaps dwarfed by comparison in real terms, but no less intimidating, are the towering citadels of the work of Fumito Ueda and Japan's studio. Ueda excels at crafting worlds that seem impossible to comprehend, yet still feel alarmingly real. Architecture that does not seem craftable by human hands, yet possesses within itself a truly tangible sense of space. Structures that stand in stark defiance of the gods, yet are built to be navigated by mortal men. Most memorable of these is the world of Shadow of the Colossus, the Forbidden Lands. A space bereft of people, but not divorced from life itself. The grassy plains, rocky canyons, and impossible deserts are host to lizards, birds, dense foliage, and also the skeleton of what once was a civilization. The scattered remnants of towering citadels, what remains now is but bones and beasts, a world you have no choice but to traverse in order to fulfill your pact with an ancient entity named Dormin. Across these lands, 16 gargantuan beings exist, some peaceful, others less so. Inhabiting the spirit of creatures land, sea and air, they have made the carcass of a lost empire their nest. The architectural ambiguity of these structures posits that this space was not built for them, yet it so regularly dwarfs them. paths designed for the humble steps of mankind, yet each shattered remnant of a wonder long dead seems built to house these monstrosities, to show them off, to proudly display their might as a humiliating form of captivity. This world is a zoo for the most heretical of creatures, bound to a fate unearned and destined to become the shattered remains of godless totems. The fall of civilizations is a cycle that never ends, a uniting historical linchpin between worlds and timelines and evolutions. Hubris set in stone, on a grand scale. The bigger they are, the harder they fall, and each solemn, sorrowful arena you find yourself fighting to the death in tells a story that echoes into eternity. I think a lot about your encounter with the third Colossus, introduced by Dormin with the words, "A giant canopy soars to the heavens, the anger of the sleeping giant shatters the earth." As you gather dust on your trail, the glow of your blade a divining rod for an extremely cursed hidden treasure, the path opens up to a lake, with an enormous circular stone platform at its centre. What awaits you is vicious, but it is this structure itself that turns my stomach to ice. The isolation of its location, the sheer size of it, only reachable thanks in part to its eternal decay. The beast, known colloquially as Gaius, is a formidable foe at first, but quickly you realise that there is power to be found in the stone beneath your feet. It is the arena itself that shatters its wrist guard, giving you an opening to attack and sink your greedy little blade into its skull. This structure is a weapon. No peace could ever be found here. I think most striking of all these buildings, however, is the one you return to time and time again. With every colossi felled, a darkness takes over, and you find yourself back where you started, hunched over, at the foot of a mausoleum of all your bad decisions. Once again you emerge from the darkness into the light. The shrine of worship is not somewhere you spend a great deal of time inside of or really looking at. A central focal point for the entire world, you are always branching away from it, snaking across the land to each new towering behemoth. Were it not for the game's careful framing, it would not surprise me if the average player would never even think to look back at where they came from, or stop and ponder the sheer size of this central hub. It appears so easily on the horizon, paradoxically seeming bigger from afar, a looming spectre of death, a reminder that for all your efforts, your journey will inevitably only ever end up back where you started. But still, the majesty of this building needs that closer, more intimate scrutiny, like the one I found when I first encountered the Sagrada Familia in the flesh. To see those jagged, asymmetrical spires vanish off outside the frame like the artificial walls of the city. To encounter the bridge that is your entrance to this sacred place, previously only seen from afar, now up close and almost horrifying in its construction. The exposed ribcage of a giant from centuries past. Towering arches spiked violently into the earth, yet still very clearly built for a civilization not dissimilar in size and shape to your own. That's the true, horrifying paradox of Shadow of the Colossus. A giant swallowed by a giant. Everything in these forbidden lands has a unique relationship to the player, wonder. They of such demure stature, heightened by their surroundings, pressed forward to slay the titans in these cracked, moss-ridden amphitheaters of the past. Why is everything so big? Why are all the structures in the land of ancient times like this? What purpose does it have to create something that eclipses any reasonable need or desire in such a way? To honor the gods? To stake a claim among them? And what does it matter to leave something lingering? A cold, hard corpse for a world that will only ever remember the shadow you cast and not the true light of your being. You can climb the Shrine of Worship, scuttling up its mossy, cracked facade. It takes time and stamina, more than you will likely have across multiple playthroughs. An endurance test unlike any other, but it is inevitably conquerable. There's a message in this alone, in the decay of a monster so far gone that what once was achievable by normal human feat now can only be surmounted by the defiance of time and space itself. In many ways, this is the perfect application of the ideas of the game, a meta-level final Colossus to surmount. At the summit of the shrine of worship lies a garden where every tree bears cursed fruit, a rotten reward for all your efforts. Another message nestled gently in your arms that such gargantuan tasks can inevitably only become your undoing. It's a vibe that permeates the entire game. You realize too late why these lands are so forbidden. Their grand works, a lighthouse, a warning to leave this place and never come back. When I play Shadow of the Colossus, I think about the long-term waste warning messages proposed by Sandia National Laboratories in the 90s. The specific wording of a message designed to carry across the eras that the dumping grounds for mankind's most toxic legacy are no space to be investigated or worshipped. This place is not a place of honor. No highly esteemed deed is commemorated here. Nothing valued is here. What is here was dangerous and repulsive to us. This message is a warning about danger. Exo 1 is a game about distance. You play the digitally recreated echo of a stranded astronaut, light years from home, and entrenched in a very peculiar alien vessel, one built around gravity and momentum to propel you forwards. As you move from planet to planet, fired through the outer reaches of space via a series of enormous interstellar cannons, your environments become increasingly warped in both shape and size. Massive slabs of alien origin shadow you on all sides as you bound and weave through storm-hazed artificial canyons and endless oceans of fog. In a place where the vast expanse of space does more to choke the mind than it does the lungs, having your journeys take place on celestial bodies makes this seemingly endless journey somehow all the worse. Exo 1 is the most frightening game I've ever played. Rendezvous with Rama opens with a bang. A history lesson in fast forward detailing that most devastating of fears, mass destruction born from a collision from outer space. The descriptions are both poetic and clinical, a hushed whimper of an utterance of a truth so painful to recall. Mankind at a loss as the heavens rain violently down upon them, the words speak for themselves. Moving at 50 kilometers a second, 1,000 tons of rock and metal impacted on the plains of northern Italy, destroying in a few flaming moments the labor of centuries. The cities of Padua and Verona were wiped from the face of the earth, and the last glories of Venice sank forever beneath the sea as the waters of the Adriatic came thundering landwards after the hammer blow from space. 600,000 people died, and the total damage was more than $1 trillion. But the loss to art, to history, to science, to the whole human race for the rest of time was beyond all computation. It was as if a great war had been fought and lost in a single morning, and few could draw much pleasure from the fact that, as the dust of destruction slowly settled, for months the whole world witnessed the most splendid dawns and sunsets since Krakatoa. The celestial violence of this opening sets the scene for a world refusing to hunker down, instead building themselves anew, around the principle that there would be no next time. Astronomy reigns supreme as a network of deep space probes trawl the solar system for signs of interstellar threat, and in the process of ensuring the safety of Earth, something is discovered. Rendezvous with Rama is a story about an investigation. An object appearing in the outer wilds of the solar system, of unknown origin, of unknown intent, moving towards the Earth with a menacing gait. It's big, too big to be ignored. And so mankind, bucking its expected trend as a civilization that responds to the unknown with violence, but for a brief moment sends a team of explorers and scientists to make sense of what this object, originally designated 31439, but now christened Rama, truly is. And what is Rama exactly? A perfect, featureless, cylindrical vessel, 20 kilometers in diameter, 50 kilometers in length, appearing just outside of Jupiter's orbit and first mistaken for an asteroid, Rama is quickly established as something else, something that could not so easily be explained away by an already established frame of reference. For the first time in 100 years, an element of total uncertainty had entered human affairs. There's a wonderful clinical approach to how the book describes the object during these opening chapters. The first images, from 10,000 kilometers away, brought to a halt the activities of all mankind. On 1 billion television screens there appeared a tiny, featureless cylinder, growing rapidly, second by second. By the time it had doubled in size, no one could pretend any longer that Rama was a natural object. And so begins the quest of the crew of the star vessel the Endeavour, led by the stalwart Commander Norton, to discover what this megastructure is and, more importantly, what it wants. No time is left wasted, as within a scant few chapters we have first contact, and then a way in. Those first nervous steps the crew of the Endeavour take as they finally breach the surface and come to terms with the sheer size of what awaits them are chilling. Rama is not occupied by the living, but it is not immediately clear if this is by design or cursed happenstance. Thought of in those first moments as both tomb and ark, the crew of the Endeavour begin to explore, and initially the inner workings of this space do little to assuage their sense of nervousness. Tutankhamun had only been buried yesterday, not even 4,000 years ago. Rama might be older than mankind. That little tomb in the Valley of the Kings could have been lost in the corridors through which they had already passed, yet the space that lay beyond this final seal was at least 1 million times greater. What awaits them inside is an infinite sea of black. But it is here that something magnificent happens, and the tone of the novel starts to shift. The seat of the horror gives way to the spirit of science with the hurling of a single flare. In a split second, fear unroots in the wake of awe. One foot, placed in front of another, into this new, exciting alien frontier, and so begins a systematic deconstruction of the unknown, an unseating of this inalienable horror, and we begin to learn. The rest of the novel, bar a few moments of mild peril and some exciting defuse-the-bomb shenanigans in the last few chapters, is a clinical, procedural expedition through the inner cavity of this grandiose infrastructure. It is enthralling to read. Like the most beautifully written diary, we see the scientific process of understanding an alien world as Norton and his colleagues make sense of this seemingly non-Euclidean space. But even as they continue to explore, there is a great sense that what they do know is but a fraction of the bigger picture, and all their scientific processes might be for naught if their assumptions about the rules of the universe turn out to be wrong. One of the great conceptual terrors of big things from far away is in how meaning gets lost over time and distance. There's an arrogance in the assumption that any alien civilization, one existing in the far reaches of the universe, would operate under the same systems of cultural exchange, morality, and science as us. The process of understanding others is built on a foundation of common experience, so what happens when our own experiences, to them, are alien? What does alien even mean, if not the complete and unembellished emancipation from understanding? We hold to the laws of physics as a universal maxim of truth, but our manipulation of such laws is almost pathetically finite. What we don't know could fill, well, the vast unexplored reaches of space and time. Of course, in the dark, we can only speculate on the shape of things, a hollow echo of a truth immortal. Empirical verification is a gift both rare and generous. There's a moment about halfway through the novel in which an enlightenment happens, both literally and figuratively. In a soundless concussion of light, dawn burst upon Rama. This moment, where the station's artificial suns finally enflame, as the enormous circular ocean of ice begins to thaw, as life descends upon Rama, elucidating the real scale of this space, is described with a language that is akin to gazing upon the divine. A last burst of terror escapes the souls of Norton and his crew as they are forced to reckon with the reality of all their expectations. Clarke describes this moment perfectly. Norton had known exactly what to expect. Nevertheless, the sight had stunned him. He was seized by a spasm of uncontrollable trembling. His hands tightened around the rungs of the ladder with the violence of a drowning man clutching at a lifebelt. The muscles of his forearms began to knot, yet at the same time his legs, already fatigued by hours of steady climbing, seemed about to give way. If it had not been for the low gravity, he might have fallen. It's the power of this artistic work to convey this sense of dread and awe at a space that defies our expectations of how spaces, no matter how big, are supposed to look. It is this unease that is the seat of Rendezvous with Rama's story, a fable of scientific expedition, mystery, and interstellar politics, a tale about dealing with what we do know, resisting mankind's proclivity to respond to the unknown with aggression, especially in the wake of global trauma, and putting our suspicions aside but for a moment to learn something new. It is in this that we see the font of the book's main source of friction, of a group effectively racing against the clock to answer an impossible question before that terminal, primal fault of mankind finally comes knocking. The novel holds these sharp intermissions between each big discovery to show the conversations being had on the other side of the solar system. Political strife holding up enlightened discourse as even in the wake of increasingly valuable information there are some who view Rama with little more than fear and anger. Fear and anger that eventually spills out into affirmation of mankind's oldest sins. In order to save the world from a hypothetical future, we must sever the real future of another. It would be easy to read the events of Clarke's novel with a world-weary cynicism. Mankind doing what it always does, giving voice and power to closed minds and silencing those who truly want to elevate humanity. But I cannot read it with anything other than a serene, exalted optimism. Beyond anything else, Rendezvous with Rama is a story about the giddy, childlike joy of discovery. It is a novel chock full of enlightened, excitable descriptions of the thought processes of its intrepid explorers. Indulgent speculation and educated assumption reign supreme in a world beyond our own. The seat of horror, then, is not in an individual's contact with infinite space, but in the volatility of a collective's emotional response to the innominate and the incomprehensible vastness of existence. A horror that, with the right people in the right place, can be defeated. Rendezvous with Rama is an exploration of mankind's other great proclivity, to unravel the secrets of the universe. How this path to understanding is only possible by meeting the mysteries of life on fertile ground. How giants only seem menacing from afar. When you get up close and personal, you quickly realize that even if you cannot comprehend the scope and intent of such entities at first, rarely does their intent venture into malevolence. Big things can be oppressive and frightening and simply, truly alien. They can be sad, mournful reminders of our own cultural liminality. They can be messages of hope in a dark age, an emotional response to an intrinsic understanding of perspective. We, weather-worn sailors, look ever forward to the horizon, to the skies, to the stars beyond. Thank you for watching.